wanna enjoy my life.
Well, I think you've accomplished all of that.
Yeah, we're getting there.
For decades, John Oates stood beside Daryl Hall, crafting the soundtrack of an era, a string of hits that defined pop, soul, and rock for millions. Their music felt effortless, their partnership unshakable, their image spotless. But beneath the harmonies lay questions that never faded, whispers of tension, stories of excess, rumors that swirled through green rooms, hotel corridors, and boardrooms, never fully confirmed, never entirely denied. For years, Oates brushed them aside with charm and a knowing smile. Every interview steered away, every rumor left to rot in speculation, until now. At 77, John Oates finally faces the questions head-on. And what he confirms doesn't just shine a light on the past, it rattles the myth of Hall & Oates itself. This isn't just another chapter in music history. It's the confession that forces us to hear every hit, every harmony, in a way we never have before. But what exactly did Oates reveal that fans never thought they'd hear from him? For more than half a century, John Oates lived beneath the shadow of one of the most successful musical partnerships in history. Together with Daryl Hall, he became one half of Hall & Oates, the best-selling duo of all time. Their songs were the soundtrack of a generation. They gave the world Rich Girl, Man-Eater, and Out of Touch. Hits that didn't just climb charts, but defined an era. To millions of fans, Hall & Oates were the embodiment of harmony, friendship, and timeless music. Yet, while the world saw a dazzling partnership, John Oates himself was often defined by what he didn't say.
John Oates, half of the legendary duo known as Hall & Oates, he has a new solo album.
For decades, rumors swirled. Some whispered about money, about contracts that left one partner with more power than the other. Others spoke of betrayal, of personal resentments buried beneath the spotlight. And then there was the most painful question of all. Had the friendship at the heart of the duo quietly rotted away? Fans wanted to believe the bond was real. They wanted to believe that the music came from brotherhood. But behind the curtain, Oates remained silent. Until now. At 77, John Oates has finally confirmed the rumors that long hung like a shadow over his career. And in doing so, he has peeled back a curtain that few dared to touch. His revelation is not just about music. It's about the price of fame, the frailty of trust, and the dangerous illusion of permanence. Why did one of music's most enduring partnerships fracture so deeply? Why did two men who once stood side by side as brothers in sound barely speak for years? And why did Oates himself wait until this late chapter of life to finally speak his truth? The answer lies not in one explosive moment, but in the slow erosion of trust that began at the very height of their fame. Fame, after all, is never free. It dazzles the audience, but behind the glamour, it extracts a cost: privacy, relationships, identity, and sometimes sanity. For Oates, the cost was higher than anyone realized. While fans saw him smiling beneath the stage lights, inside he was shrinking, overshadowed, and unheard. His silence became a prison. His words now confirm that the whispers were not inventions of the press, not idle gossip, but warnings of deeper cracks inside the glittering empire of Hall & Oates. But what, exactly, were those rumors? They began in dressing rooms and boardrooms, in late-night conversations between industry insiders who caught glimpses of tension where the public saw harmony. Stories of uneven credit, of one partner holding the reins, of business overshadowing brotherhood, whispers of long nights where words were exchanged in anger, followed by mornings of silence that lasted for months. For years, these stories were dismissed as exaggerations. Hall & Oates kept performing, kept releasing music, kept smiling for the cameras. To the public, they were untouchable. But silence can be louder than words, and Oates's refusal to address the speculation only fueled its power. What was he hiding? What was too painful to say? To understand why Oates's revelation matters, one must return to the very beginning. Their rise, their shared dream, and the illusion that success would bind them forever. Because before the silence, before the lawsuits, before the painful confessions, there was music. Two young men with nothing but ambition and hunger. finding each other in the chaos of Philadelphia's music scene. They believed they were destined to climb together, to share the spotlight, to conquer the industry as equals. And for a time, that dream felt real. The irony is that the very music that made them legends, the songs that promised unity, joy, and connection, was built on a partnership that was quietly unraveling. The deeper the success, the more fragile the bond became. Behind every sold-out arena was a silence that grew heavier with each passing year. Behind every platinum record was a wound that never healed. The truth John Oates now confirms is as heartbreaking as it is inevitable. Legends are human, and humans break. The myth of Hall and Oates as unbreakable brothers was just that, a myth. And the man who spent his life defined by silence has at last decided to speak. Because before the silence, before the lawsuits, before the painful confessions, there was music. Music that made them legends. Music that convinced the world that Hall and Oates were unbreakable. Or so it seemed. The 1970s and 80s belonged to Hall and Oates. At their peak, they weren't just a pop duo. They were a cultural force. Daryl Hall's golden-haired charisma and soaring vocals paired with John Oates's gritty edge and songwriting precision to create a sound that blurred the lines of rock, pop, and soul. Their records sold millions. Their music videos dominated MTV. Their tours packed arenas with screaming fans who believed they were witnessing not just a band, but a brotherhood in perfect harmony. To the outside world, it seemed like nothing could touch them. But behind the curtain, the balance of power was never equal. Hall was the frontman, the voice that radio and television clung to, while Oates was often relegated to the background. In interviews, on posters, in music videos, the camera always found Hall first. To the world, Oates was the other guy, the one with the mustache.
Well, welcome, John Oates. So good to have you here. And we have both spent a lot of time in Colorado, even though it's not our...
The sideman who stood in Hall's shadow. It was an image that haunted him, one that shaped both public perception and private resentment. The duo's peak was nothing short of historic. They dominated the Billboard charts with 6 #1 singles, and their albums went platinum again and again. Private Eyes, I Can't Go For That, No Can Do, and Kiss on My List weren't just hits. They became cultural landmarks. Their hooks stitched themselves into the very fabric of American life, played endlessly on radios, at parties, in the background of ordinary moments. Hall and Oates weren't just musicians. They were the sound of an era. But success comes at a price. With every chart-topping single, with every late-night show appearance, the invisible wall between Hall and Oates grew taller. Fans saw harmony, but the men themselves felt distance. Money, fame, and ego, 3 forces that have destroyed countless partnerships, were already at play. But there was something deeper, something more corrosive. Oates has since confirmed what many suspected. The very foundation of their success contained the seeds of its unraveling. It was never as equal as it looked, he admitted years later. And those words cut to the heart of the rumors that had swirled for decades. For while Hall basked in the spotlight, Oates stood in silence, his contributions quietly dismissed. That silence became a breeding ground for doubt, for bitterness, and eventually for fracture. Even at the height of their fame, insiders whispered about disputes over credit, control, and recognition. Who really steered the ship? Who deserved the spotlight? Who was carrying the weight? And who was simply benefiting from the myth of equality? These questions haunted not just the men themselves, but the people around them. Managers, producers, and friends often caught glimpses of the tension that the public refused to see. For a time, the illusion held. The music was too powerful, too successful, too beloved for the fractures to be noticed by casual eyes. To the fans, Hall and Oates were inseparable. To the media, they were a brand, a unit, a perfectly balanced pair. But illusions are fragile. Success has a way of amplifying silence, of making every unspoken word ring louder. And when the shows ended, when the stage lights dimmed, and the screaming crowds disappeared, the distance between Hall and Oates was impossible to ignore. Behind closed doors, the cracks widened. Small disputes became bigger ones. Every song became a negotiation. every decision, about credits, about tours, about money, was a reminder that the balance was off. Oates, the man who had been essential in crafting their sound, increasingly felt like a shadow in his own story. Hall, for all his brilliance, stood center stage, taking the lion's share of glory, while Oates faded into the margins. What the fans didn't know was that beneath the applause, a storm was already forming, a storm built from years of imbalance, resentment, and unspoken truths. And soon, the rumors would begin, whispers that would follow them for decades, long after the music stopped dominating the charts. Because legends don't break in a single moment, they unravel slowly, silently, until the truth can no longer be hidden. From the outside, Hall and Oates were invincible. They had it all: money, fame, and a legacy written in platinum records. Their music defined the soundtrack of the late 20th century, playing on radios, televisions, and in packed arenas across the globe. Together, they seemed unstoppable. But inside their private world, resentment simmered. For John Oates, the cost of being the other guy was beginning to weigh heavily. To the public, he was just the man with the mustache, the quiet sideman who stood slightly behind Daryl Hall. But Oates was never just a background player. He was a songwriter, a musician, a craftsman whose fingerprints were on every record. He wasn't simply standing in the shadows. He was helping build the stage itself. Yet the brand of Hall & Oates increasingly revolved around one man: Daryl Hall's voice, Daryl Hall's face, Daryl Hall's name. For Oates, it was like watching himself fade from his own story. Whispers began backstage and in boardrooms, rumors that Oates was unhappy, that he felt silenced, that he was trapped inside a machine designed to celebrate one half of the partnership while diminishing the other. Those closest to the duo spoke of tense meetings, of passive-aggressive jabs exchanged in green rooms, of unspoken bitterness that lingered between performances. To outsiders, it looked like a partnership in perfect harmony, but to insiders, it was a house divided. Two men sharing a stage but living in separate worlds. And it wasn't always about the music. Money and contracts often deepened the wounds. Decisions about royalties, publishing rights, and creative direction became battlegrounds where egos collided. Business deals and financial structures often tilted in Hall's favor, creating an imbalance that Oates couldn't ignore. For every smiling photograph and carefully crafted interview, there were nights filled with silence, arguments, and the growing awareness that their partnership was not as equal as fans believed. John Oates would later admit that during these years he lived a double existence. On stage, he was the reliable partner, the steady presence, the harmonizer, the man who gave fans exactly what they came for. He smiled, he strummed his guitar, he played his role with quiet professionalism, but offstage, he was drowning in dissatisfaction. He longed for an identity that wasn't tethered to Daryl Hall's shadow. The rumors of tension weren't fabrications. They were fragments of the truth, glimpses of a fractured partnership hidden behind choreographed performances and public smiles. The cracks grew wider with each passing year. The illusion of unity became harder to sustain. Fans continued to cheer, but unknowingly, they were cheering for something that no longer existed. The music was real, the hits undeniable, but the brotherhood, that was already gone. And when the rumors finally spilled into public view, they revealed just how fragile even the most legendary partnerships can be. For all their records, their tours, their acclaim, Hall and Oates were not invincible. They were two men bound by music, but divided by silence. And sooner or later, the truth was destined to emerge. The first public signs of trouble appeared quietly, almost like static in the background of their perfect harmony. For years, Hall and Oates had been untouchable. They weren't just stars, they were institutions. Their names were synonymous with success, their songs woven into the very fabric of American culture. But by the mid-1980s, the shine had begun to dim. Hall and Oates were no longer simply a pop duo. They were a brand, a business, a money-making machine. And with that success came the inevitable whispers. Fans noticed first, even if they couldn't fully articulate what they were seeing. They whispered about arguments backstage, about the colder chemistry during live shows, about a friendship that no longer looked like the bond it once was. Insiders, those who stood just close enough to glimpse behind the curtain, spoke in more direct terms. The duo, they said, barely spoke off stage anymore. Conversations that had once been filled with laughter, plans, and creative sparks were now handled by managers, lawyers, and accountants. Hall and Oates still stood side by side under the spotlight, but the distance between them was measured not in feet, but in silence. The tabloids, always eager to feast on cracks in perfection, painted it as ego. Daryl Hall, the golden-haired frontman with the voice that soared, was chasing solo ambitions, dabbling in projects that had nothing to do with the duo. John Oates, the quieter partner, the man with the mustache, seemed to fade further into the background with every passing year. The headlines wrote themselves. Hall was moving on, and Oates was being left behind. But behind the headlines, the truth was darker and more complex. John Oates would later admit that the partnership had become suffocating, a gilded cage from which he couldn't escape. "I felt like I didn't exist outside of Hall and Oates," he confessed years later. Those words cut deep. For decades, Oates had played his part, writing, performing, building a sound that made them legends. Yet in the eyes of the world, he was invisible. His confession gave weight to the whispers, confirming that what fans sensed was not illusion, but reality.
I said, well, I'll just step aside. And people do it all the time. I mean, you look at all the artists who are selling all their catalogs. It's pretty common. It's not that big a deal.
The rumors weren't only about professional jealousy or creative imbalance. There were murmurs of betrayal, of money mishandled, of contracts that tilted in one direction. Industry insiders claimed publishing rights were unevenly split, that recognition and credit often skewed toward Hall, while Oates carried equal, if not greater, creative weight. For years, Oates bit his tongue. He smiled for the cameras, fulfilled the obligations, and kept the machinery running. But every silence, every forced grin, only added fuel to speculation. By the late 1980s, the whispers had grown louder than the music itself. They dominated conversations in the industry, hung heavy in fan circles, and cast shadows over the duo's success. Were they even friends anymore? Or had they become little more than business partners, bound by contracts and obligations, chained to a machine too profitable to abandon? The public didn't know the answer. All they had were rumors. Rumors that stung with just enough truth to linger, rumors that refused to disappear, no matter how many smiles were flashed on stage. And now, decades later, John Oates has confirmed what fans always suspected. The rumors were not born from fantasy. They were born from fractures, real, painful, and lasting, that the duo could never fully repair. The partnership that once seemed untouchable was, in fact, fragile all along. The silence was not absence, it was evidence. For all the platinum records and sold-out arenas, Hall and Oates were not invincible. They were men, flawed and divided, whose partnership crumbled quietly long before the music stopped. In the music industry, contracts are written in ink but lived in blood. For Hall and Oates, one particular contract would mark the turning point of their empire. Signed at the height of their fame, it tied the two men together not just as partners, but as commodities. Two names fused into one brand. For the world, this was a guarantee of more hits, more tours, more success. For Oates, it became a prison. The deal was structured in ways that amplified existing tensions. Publishing splits, creative control, and financial oversight were all points of contention. Oates has since revealed that the arrangement left him feeling sidelined, his contributions buried beneath the Hall and Oates trademark. "Everything we did was Hall and Oates," he said. "I lost myself in that." From the outside, the contract meant stability. To the record labels, to promoters, to fans, it ensured that the hits would keep coming. But to the men inside it, it meant the end of freedom.
Well, you two hadn't worked together creatively in over 20 years.
Right. That's right. The only thing we did together was play concerts.
Hall wanted to pursue solo projects. Oates longed for individuality, yet the contract demanded unity, whether they wanted it or not. The irony was cruel. The same document that had secured their empire also accelerated its collapse. Decisions became legal battles. Songs became points of negotiation. Every creative spark was filtered through a web of clauses and obligations. And as the years passed, the rumors intensified. Whispers of lawsuits, of silent feuds, of two men bound together only by ink on paper. The contract didn't just shape their careers, it reshaped their lives. And when the cracks finally gave way, the fallout was impossible to contain. There was a time when Hall and Oates were inseparable. They wrote together, toured together, lived as though their futures were bound by the same destiny. But by the 1990s, that bond had frayed to the breaking point. The friendship that once fueled their music had been replaced by distance and silence. Oates described it as a slow death. Not one explosive argument, but years of small fractures, decisions made without consultation, time spent apart, lives lived in different orbits. While Hall chased the limelight with solo projects and collaborations, Oates retreated from the spotlight, searching for meaning outside the machine. The once inseparable duo were now more like reluctant colleagues, sharing a stage, but not a life. The rumors became impossible to ignore. Fans noticed the tension in interviews, the stiffness on stage. Whispers claimed they traveled separately on tours, barely interacting off-stage. Industry insiders said they were essentially living separate lives, brought together only by contractual obligation.
We'll just throw
But
that.
the rest is secret, you know? We can't give away our
Not
set.
secrets, but
When asked, both men downplayed the tension. They insisted they were still friends, still united. But Oates's later words confirmed what the world had long suspected. We drifted apart. We weren't those kids anymore. It was a quiet admission, but one that revealed the truth, that the partnership had become a shell of what it once was. And yet, the music kept playing. The tours continued. The brand lived on, even as the bond that created it dissolved. It was a cruel irony that the very success that had made them legends had also ensured they could never truly escape each other. By the time the silence finally shattered, Hall and Oates were no longer brothers in arms. They were strangers bound by history. For decades, Hall and Oates had managed to keep their fractures hidden from the public. But in the 2020s, the mask was ripped away. News broke of a lawsuit, John Oates against Daryl Hall. To fans, it was unthinkable. To the insiders who had whispered for years, it was inevitable. The lawsuit revealed what had long been suspected, that their partnership had decayed into distrust. At the center was money, publishing rights, and the ownership of the Hall and Oates brand. Oates, at 77, made a move that shocked not only the industry, but Hall himself. Documents filed in court painted a picture of betrayal, not just business, but personal. For decades, fans had clung to the illusion of brotherhood. They wanted to believe the duo still shared the same bond that had produced Sarah Smile and She's Gone. But the lawsuit shattered that fantasy. These weren't brothers anymore. They were adversaries. Hall himself admitted in interviews that he and Oates had lived separate lives for years. "John is my business partner," he said flatly.
You still tour together, don't you?
yeah, but he's not my partner.
Well,
He's my business partner.
The warmth was gone, replaced by a language of contracts and obligations. To the world, that bluntness confirmed the rumors better than any court document ever could. The lawsuit was a wound laid bare for all to see. And though the case itself may have been about numbers and percentages, the deeper truth was unmistakable. The partnership that once symbolized harmony had finally collapsed under the weight of its own silence. When John Oates finally broke his silence, the words carried the weight of decades. At 77, he no longer had to protect the illusion. He admitted what fans had long whispered. The partnership was never as equal as it seemed. He felt overshadowed, overlooked, and at times, invisible. "I don't regret the music," Oates said, "but I regret losing myself." It was a confession that peeled back the glossy image the world had worshipped. Oates confirmed that the duo's bond had eroded years earlier, that the rumors of tension were not inventions of tabloids, but reflections of reality. he admitted that the lawsuit was not just about money, it was about reclaiming his identity after decades of silence. For the first time, Oates spoke openly about the pain of being dismissed as the other guy. Fans who had once overlooked him now heard the bitterness in his words, the exhaustion of a man who carried half the burden but received a fraction of the recognition. The rumors, long whispered in backstage corridors, had finally been confirmed by the man himself.
And I realized what was happening was I was reuniting with my musical self and my personal myself as a man.
And in that moment, the myth of Hall & Oates crumbled. What remained was the truth. Two men bound by history, but divided by ego, money, and betrayal. For Oates, it was liberation. For fans, it was heartbreak. The fallout was immediate. Some fans rallied to Oates' side, applauding him for finally speaking his truth. Others condemned him, accusing him of tarnishing the legacy for personal gain. Online forums buzzed with arguments. Was Oates justified in his bitterness? Or was he betraying a partnership that had given him everything? Generations who grew up on Hall & Oates hits struggled to reconcile the music they loved with the fractured reality behind it. The songs still sparked joy, but the image of harmony had been broken. To hear "You Make My Dreams" now was to hear it differently, through the lens of resentment and silence. The divide among fans mirrored the divide between the men themselves.
Hall did clarify he likes Oates. "Oh, no, he said. I like John. We're friends. We just have different directions."
Some insisted that Daryl Hall was always the true genius, that Oates should be grateful for his role. Others argued that Oates had been unfairly erased from the story, his contributions minimized for decades. The truth, of course, was more complicated. Both men had built the empire, both had sacrificed, both had suffered. Yet the revelation of bitterness forced fans to choose sides, to confront the uncomfortable reality that even legends are human, and humans break. In the end, the fans were left with a choice: to cling to the myth of brotherhood, or to accept the messy, painful truth. At 77, John Oates has finally confirmed the rumors. The silence has been broken. The truth has been laid bare. But what remains when the music fades, when the myths dissolve, when the rumors become reality? For Hall & Oates, the legacy is complicated. They are still the best-selling duo of all time, their songs still embedded in the DNA of pop culture. The music endures, but the brotherhood, the illusion of harmony, has been revealed as fragile, fractured, and perhaps never as real as fans believed. And yet, perhaps that is the ultimate truth of their story. Great art often comes not from unity, but from tension. The very fractures that tore Hall & Oates apart may have been the same forces that fueled their greatest music. Without the imbalance, without the resentment, without the silent struggle, would the songs have carried the same power? Oates himself has found peace in speaking the truth. "I don't need the myth anymore," he said. His words carry the weary strength of a man who has lived through both triumph and betrayal. For him, the rumors no longer hold power. They are simply facts of a life lived in the shadow of fame. For fans, the story remains unfinished. Some will cling to the songs without caring about the truth. Others will hear the music differently, tinted by the revelations of bitterness. But one thing is certain: the legacy of Hall & Oates will never again be heard in the same way, because now the silence has been broken. If whispers follow a man for decades, do they ever truly fade, or only wait to be confirmed? At 77, John Oates finally breaks the silence, but the truth of his confession depends on how we hear it. Before the curtain falls again, remember, some rumors were never just rumors at all. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.